Hi, my name is Dino Everett, and I'm from the PMRC. And lately I've been looking around YouTube and seeing a bunch of record collecting videos and noticing some trends like top 100 this and things like that. But I thought, since I'm an archivist by trade, maybe I would make some record collecting videos that sort of have a historical or archival angle to them. So that's what we're going to do today. This is going to be a historical look at collecting punk records from 1976 until present day. Okay, so back in the day, unless you lived in a big city, you probably were getting things through the mail. How did we find out about it? Mainly through fanzines and mail order businesses and things like this. So fanzines for me was the main way of learning about what punk records were coming out. And then there were different mail order companies where you could order the records from. So fanzines like Punk out of New York. There's Livewire was a good one. Alan Anger. He was always going down to the Roxy Club in London and talking about the new bands he saw. 48 Thrills, Adrian Thrills. Panache was another one. Panache. Mick Mercer. Gutter Snipe a little later in the late 70s, early 80s, Flipside, and then of course Slash. I amassed hundreds and hundreds of fanzines from all over the place learning about punk bands. One of the fanzines that was really good was a fanzine called Outlet. And what Outlet would do is they would sort of do overviews of different record companies. So like this is, let's see, Outlet 6, which I believe did an overview of Raw Records, and then 7 has a listing for Stiff Records, and I think issue 4 did Chiswick. So the main thing in the early days was, first you had to learn what punk bands are out there making records, and then you could go seeking those records. Another flip side here, which by this point in the 80s, they were doing tons of record reviews, so it was easy to find out what bands were coming along. And Trouser Press was a really good one because it would not only tell you about records that were coming out, but there would be like lots of ads with people selling records. Another thing that was great back in the 70s was using the British music papers. There was like 4 big ones. There was Melody Maker, Sounds, the New Musical Express, and then one called Record Mirror. Melody Maker to me was kind of not the best. It had a lot of the old Led Zeppelin and things like that. New Musical Express was always really a good one. Sounds was a good one, and kept going into the 80s with Gary Bushell, who did like the Oi bands and things like that, and Record Mirror. So that was a good way to learn about some of the British punk bands coming along. New York Rocker was crucial for learning about all the New York bands. And then, like I said, there were mail order places you could get records, but there was also a very important kind of newspaper that you could subscribe to called Goldmine. And Goldmine was this big, thick record collecting newspaper, essentially, just packed with ads of people selling records. And so I relied heavily on Goldmine to get records. I actually remember buying lots of records from a guy named Greg Prevost, who had a band called the Chesterfield Kings. But Goldmine was really, really important back in the day for finding records in the sort of pre-discogs world. Now we're getting into an area where, like, these were magazines and things like that. If you lived in a big city, there were, probably good record stores there. And there was a couple of companies. Gem was a company that imported records from overseas. I always had kind of a love-hate relationship with Gem because they would usually ruin the covers by sticking their Gem labels on it. But if you lived in a city that had a decent record store, you'd get most of your imports through this company, Gem. Another thing that became useful is, starting in 1978, people started putting out guides to find, where you would find out about even more obscure punk records. Like, everybody was kind of covering the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Damned and things like that. But if you were like me and you wanted to seek out, like, what are the little bands that are just putting out one single and stuff, thankfully people started putting out, like, book collections that you could use as, like, a checklist. The first one that I remember was actually by Greg Shaw, who had Bomp Records, and he also put out the Bomp fanzine. He put out a great one in the 70s called New Wave on Record, England and Europe, 1975 to 78. And it was like a really good overview of all the punk records up to that point that had been released. I will say there's a lot of power pop in this book. So if you didn't like power pop, that book's going to be a little, you're going to have to research things. The next one that came out in the early 80s, there was 2 volumes. There was one called just Volume, and then in 82, 83, there was a second release called Volume, and this thing was enormous. And if you were anyone that cared about collecting punk records, you lived and died by this book. It has everything in here. It's insane. Then for a number of years, I don't recall anybody putting out any other guides until the early 90s, when a guy named Neil Perry put out this rare new wave singles book. The fun part about this book right here is that he has actual, like, dollar values for what the records were worth. And looking through this now, very few records had even like a $10 value. Just remember that when you're looking on Discogs and you see, like, rare, obscure singles that are $200, $500. In the early 90s, they were probably like $10, $15. And as we got into the early 2000s, we started seeing the resurgence of records again, and so people started writing books again. One of the first, there was a cluster of books that came out, but one of the first was by a guy named Gavin Walsh, who he's done some pretty decent Sex Pistol books about Sex Pistols collectibles and stuff, but he did one called Punk on 45, Revolutions on Vinyl, 76 to 79, which, if you don't know that his book came out first, you might think that this was a money grab, because I'm going to show you a couple of other books that one's called Punk 45 and the other one's called 45 Revolutions. But his book came out first. Then in 2007 was when the heavens opened and Mario Pensiera's book came out. And this is, without a doubt, if you care about punk records, especially more obscure punk records, you absolutely have to own this book, because not only does he go through like band by band all the different records that they put out and stuff, but he's got reviews in this book that are super important, because if you're just scanning discogs looking for punk records and you're looking for like more obscure records, there are tons of things on discogs that are listed as punk records, and you're going to be disappointed. But this book, which sad to say that it's hard to come by now, but this thing is indispensable if you care about collecting punk vinyl. Another book that came out that's kind of interesting, and it goes around the U.S. Like here's Texas punk rock in the 70s. It's a Japanese book, so you can't really read it, but it's nice to see what some of those more rare records look like. One of the ones that's probably the easiest to come by and is really a wonderful book, because it covers the popular stuff and some of the not so popular stuff, and full color, beautiful reproductions of the sleeves and things like that. It's pretty easy to come by and not terribly expensive, but this is a really good book to own. And then the last couple of books are, I'm definitely a big fan of these by Tony Page. He's put out two volumes called Anari in the UK, 1 and 2. And for someone like me who is really just looking for the most obscure punk singles, he has uncovered just all kinds of really great, rare, unknown bands. And now we're up to the present day, and obviously you have discogs, which is, a great way of buying records and being in touch with sellers and things like that, but it doesn't always let you know what's coming out. If you're interested in brand new punk bands and brand new releases coming out, you can still get a magazine that started back in 1979 called Record Collector. You can still get the monthly magazine that is really good as far as just giving you a rundown of what records are in the pipeline to be released soon. And I'll give one last plug here for if you're really into brand new punk bands and punk vinyl and stuff, then you're going to have to subscribe to Razer Cake, because they probably do the best job of keeping you up to date with what are the brand new punk bands putting out records to this day, and giving reviews. So if you have a certain style of punk that you're interested in, you can read the reviews. There's also Viva La Rock that does a bunch of record reviews. I will point out one of my favorite places online to purchase records from is from a guy named Dizzy Holmes, who has a website called Bored Teenagers. Click on one of the links at the top of the page. It takes you to his record store, which is called Detour Records. Bored Teenagers is one of the best web resources out there about the most obscure British punk bands. Anybody that put out a record and plenty that didn't even put out a record, he's got them listed alphabetically, and you can find all sorts of really great information about the rarest of rare punk bands. And he will a lot of times have some of these rare singles for sale through the Detour Records website. And in some cases, when these records get so rare that they're unaffordable, he'll have official represses that you can buy through his website. So hopefully this was a record collecting video that you can get some use out of it. I have some other ideas for some more that I'll do later on. I do want you to know that in no way, shape, or form are we doing these to try to get the commercials and make money and things like that. This is strictly just to put information out there. At the PMRC, we care about the history of punk rock, and there wouldn't be any of these punk rock videos and films to restore if these bands wouldn't have been making records back in the 70s. So, see you later.